After his death, Sarah Jessica Parker finally stepped forward, revealing a deeply personal truth about Robert Redford that she had hidden for years. Before we begin, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the untold stories behind our icons. And remember, you can always explore the sources anytime you'd like. To understand why this revelation matters, we first have to understand who Sarah Jessica Parker truly is. Sarah Jessica Parker didn't arrive in Hollywood fully formed. She grew up in a large family in Ohio, surrounded by discipline, creativity, and resilience. Money was tight, but imagination was rich, and from an early age, Sarah learned how to perform, how to endure, and how to believe. She wasn't loud in her ambition. She was focused. Ballet, theater, Broadway, each step shaped her into someone who understood characters deeply, someone who listened more than she spoke. By the time she entered the public eye, she wasn't chasing fame, she was building a voice. And that voice would one day define a generation through Carrie Bradshaw, a character who turned vulnerability into power and questions into identity. Sarah Jessica Parker became more than an actress. She became a mirror for millions of women navigating love, independence, and longing. But long before New York sidewalks and Manilo Blahniks, there was a movie screen and a man on it. Long before the world knew her name, Sarah Jessica Parker was learning how to survive inside uncertainty. Born in Nelsonville, Ohio, she was one of 8 children in a blended family that understood scarcity not as a temporary condition, but as a daily reality. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother later remarried a truck driver-turned-entrepreneur who believed in structure, routine, and relentless effort. Together, they raised a household where schedules mattered, discipline was non-negotiable, and dreams, while encouraged, had to be earned. This was not a childhood of indulgence. It was a childhood of repetition, dance classes, vocal training, schoolwork, auditions. Her mother believed that talent without training was a gamble and training without consistency was a waste. Sarah absorbed this philosophy quietly. She learned early that showing up mattered more than being seen. While other children played freely, Sarah rehearsed. Ballet was not just an art form, it was a language of control. Theater was not an escape, it was an education. Broadway, when it eventually came, was not a miracle. It was a destination reached through muscle memory and resilience. By the age of 11, Sarah Jessica Parker was already working professionally, not as a prodigy to be marveled at, but as a young performer doing her job. She understood cues, she respected crews, she learned how to listen. These were not glamorous lessons, but they were foundational. They taught her how to inhabit a room without demanding it bend around her. Hollywood did not mold her, she arrived already shaped. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Parker began appearing in television and film roles that hinted at something unusual. She had presence, but not the kind that shouted. She was expressive, but not indulgent. Casting directors noticed something subtle. She could convey thought. She could play characters who were thinking, doubting, processing. In an industry that often prized certainty, Sarah Jessica Parker specialized in questions. One of her earliest defining moments came not through celebrity, but through proximity. As a teenager, she met Robert Downey Jr. They were young, ambitious, and trying to figure out how to exist in a world that demanded constant performance on screen and off. Their relationship, while brief, was formative. It exposed her early to the volatility of fame, to the fragile line between brilliance and self-destruction. It also taught her something crucial: love alone does not fix chaos. This lesson stayed with her. Throughout the 1980s, Parker worked steadily but without explosion. Films like Footloose, Girls Just Want to Have Fun, and LA Story gave her visibility but not mythology. She was not marketed as a bombshell or a box office guarantee. She was something harder to categorize, a thinking actress in an industry that often struggled to know what to do with women who didn't fit a single archetype. And so she waited, not passively but patiently. What separated Sarah Jessica Parker from many of her contemporaries was her refusal to rush her own narrative. She did not cling to youth as a currency. She did not panic when leading roles slowed. Instead, she returned to the stage. Broadway remained her anchor, her reminder that performance was about craft, not attention. Then in 1998, something shifted. Sex and the City was not supposed to change television. It was not designed as a cultural manifesto. It was a risk centered on female desire, friendship, and internal dialogue at a time when such themes were still considered niche or uncomfortable. Sarah Jessica Parker was not the obvious choice to lead it. She was not the most conventionally glamorous. She did not project dominance or seduction in predictable ways. But she understood Carrie Bradshaw. Carrie was not aspirational because she was perfect. She was aspirational because she was honest. She made mistakes. She questioned herself. She loved deeply and often unwisely. She used humor as armor and writing as survival. These were not traits Parker had to invent. They were instincts she had spent a lifetime refining. As Carrie Bradshaw, Sarah Jessica Parker gave voice to women who were rarely centered, not as moral lessons but as complex individuals. The character did not resolve her contradictions. She lived inside them, and millions recognized themselves in that uncertainty. The impact was seismic. Fashion became narrative, relationships became philosophy, New York City became a character. But beneath the surface spectacle was something quieter and more enduring, a woman modeling how to ask questions without apology. Sarah Jessica Parker did not play Carrie as a fantasy, she played her as a process. Fame arrived differently this time. It was not sudden, it was cumulative. Parker became synonymous with a generation of women navigating careers, friendships, aging, and identity in real time, yet she remained strikingly private. She married actor Matthew Broderick not in a spectacle but in a modest ceremony. She built a family without turning it into content. She spoke rarely and carefully. This restraint was not accidental. It was strategy shaped by experience. Parker had seen what happened when the self dissolved into the spotlight. She had watched brilliance burn too fast. And so she constructed a boundary between her work and her life, not as a wall but as a filter. As Sex and the City evolved, so did Parker. She became a producer, a decision-maker, a steward of story rather than just its vessel. She advocated for depth, for nuance, for narratives that did not flatten women into lessons. Even when the series faced criticism for excess, for blind spots, Parker remained engaged rather than defensive. She understood that cultural impact invites scrutiny. And she welcomed it. After the show ended, she did not chase reinvention through shock. She chose continuity through substance. Fashion lines, production companies, stage returns. She expanded laterally rather than vertically, building a career that resembled a portfolio rather than a spike. Perhaps most telling was her return to Carrie Bradshaw years later, not to resurrect youth but to examine change. Aging, loss, reinvention, these themes mirrored Parker's own life. The revival was not about nostalgia. It was about confrontation, with time, with identity, with who we become when the questions evolve. Sarah Jessica Parker never pretended to have answers. That was her power. In an industry that rewards certainty, she built a legacy on curiosity. In a culture obsessed with arrival, she emphasized process. Her journey from a disciplined childhood in Ohio to the sidewalks of fictional Manhattan was not a straight line. It was a series of deliberate choices rooted in self-awareness. Behind the success, behind the awards, there was always a quiet reference point, a cinematic presence that shaped how she saw romance, masculinity, and beauty itself. And that presence had a name. Robert Redford didn't just act, he embodied an era. With his effortless charisma, golden features, and quiet confidence, he became the symbol of thoughtful masculinity in American cinema. Redford's power was never loud. It lived in his restraint. His smile carried warmth. His silence carried meaning. Films like The Way We Were didn't just succeed, they imprinted themselves on culture. As Hubbell Gardner, Redford wasn't just a romantic lead, he was complicated, human, flawed. And millions fell in love not only with the character but with what he represented, a man torn between comfort and conviction. Off-screen, Redford became something even greater, a visionary. Sundance, independent cinema, storytelling without compromise. His legacy wasn't built on fame alone but on integrity. And somewhere in the audience, a young girl was watching, completely captivated. Robert Redford's story does not begin with applause. It begins with restlessness. Born Charles Robert Redford Jr. in Santa Monica, California in 1936, he grew up under the shadow of expectation and the weight of unfulfilled promise. His father worked as an accountant, a practical man who believed in stability and predictability. His mother was gentle, artistic, and deeply influential. From her, Redford inherited sensitivity. From his father, resistance. As a young man, Redford struggled to fit neatly into the structures laid out for him. He was intelligent but unfocused, athletic but undisciplined, curious but resistant to authority. He attended college on a baseball scholarship, only to lose it due to drinking and disengagement. This early failure would haunt him not as shame but as a question. What kind of man was he supposed to be? In the 1950s, America was rigid in its definitions of masculinity. Men were expected to be decisive, dominant, emotionally contained. Redford, by contrast, was introspective. He felt deeply, questioned openly, and resisted simple answers. These traits, initially perceived as weaknesses, would later become his greatest strength. After the death of his mother, an event that marked him permanently, Redford left the United States and traveled through Europe. He painted, he wandered, he observed. These were not the actions of a man chasing stardom. They were the actions of someone searching for meaning. When he returned to America, he committed to acting not as a vehicle for fame but as a craft. He studied at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts and honed his skills in theater and television. Early roles came slowly. Casting directors saw his looks before they saw his depth. He was too handsome, they said, too polished, too safe. Ironically, it was this perceived safety that masked the complexity underneath. Redford broke through in the 1960s, but not as a conventional star. He brought something new to the screen: vulnerability without weakness. His characters were often conflicted men, idealists in pragmatic worlds, romantics in cynical systems, thinkers in cultures that rewarded action over reflection. In Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, he played the charming outlaw not as a brute but as a strategist. In Jeremiah Johnson, he embodied solitude, survival, and spiritual reckoning. In All the President's Men, he became the face of journalistic integrity, a man driven not by ego but by truth. But it was the way we were that etched him into emotional memory. Hubbell Gardiner was not a hero. He was a man divided, torn between political awareness and personal comfort, between love and ease. Paired with Barbara Streisand's fiercely principled Katie Morosky, Redford's Hubbell became a symbol of a particular masculine dilemma: the desire to do good without sacrificing belonging. The film resonated because it told an uncomfortable truth. Love is not always enough. Conviction is not always rewarded. And sometimes the most painful choice is the one that allows you to survive. Redford played Hubbell with gentleness, not cowardice. He did not judge the character. He inhabited him. And in doing so, he allowed audiences, especially men, to see themselves reflected with honesty rather than condemnation. This was Redford's gift. As the 1970s unfolded, he became the defining face of a changing America. The country was disillusioned by war, by politics, by broken promises. Traditional heroes no longer felt trustworthy. Redford's screen presence offered something different: integrity without certainty, strength without domination. He was a leading man who listened. But fame for Redford was never the destination. It was an inconvenience, sometimes useful, often dangerous. He distrusted Hollywood's appetite for excess and its tendency to flatten artists into commodities. Even at the height of his popularity, he resisted being absorbed entirely by the system that celebrated him. Instead, he began to build something parallel. In 1981, Redford founded the Sundance Institute. What began as a modest effort to support emerging filmmakers grew into a movement that reshaped independent cinema. Sundance was not about prestige. It was about permission for artists to tell stories that did not fit studio formulas, that challenged audiences rather than comforted them. Through Sundance, Redford became a curator of voices. He championed filmmakers who were unknown, unpolished, and uncompromising. He invested in stories that asked difficult questions about identity, power, morality, and belonging. This was not philanthropy, it was philosophy. Redford believed that storytelling was a civic act, that cinema could expand empathy, that art could resist homogenization. His commitment to independent film was not nostalgic, it was radical. At the same time, his personal life reflected a similar desire for grounding. He married young, had children, and experienced profound loss with the death of his firstborn son. This tragedy deepened his introspection and reinforced his belief that life could not be consumed by ambition alone. Later relationships, including his marriage to artist Sybil Shaggers, reflected a shared devotion to creativity, nature, and environmental activism. Redford became a vocal advocate for conservation, using his platform not to perform virtue, but to support policy and awareness. Throughout the decades, his acting evolved. He embraced age not as an obstacle but as texture. Films like Ordinary People, which he directed, revealed his sensitivity behind the camera. He understood silence, pacing, and emotional restraint in ways that few directors could articulate. Redford did not chase relevance, relevance followed him. What made him enduring was not his beauty, though it was undeniable, but his coherence. His values aligned with his choices. His public image matched his private convictions. In an industry often defined by contradiction, Redford offered continuity. And then there is the legacy you cannot quantify. The young filmmakers mentored at Sundance, the audiences shaped by stories that might never have been told, the men who learned that masculinity could include doubt, tenderness, and ethical conflict. And somewhere in the dark of a movie theater, a young girl watching the screen, absorbing not just the story but the possibility. Because Robert Redford was never just a star. He was a signal that success did not require surrender, that beauty did not negate depths, that influence could be exercised quietly, deliberately, and with care. He showed that a man could be romantic without being possessive, principled without being rigid, Powerful without being loud. Their paths didn't cross through tabloids or dramatic headlines. They crossed in imagination, inspiration, and quiet dreams, dreams that Sarah Jessica Parker carried with her into adulthood. In a video interview with W Magazine, Sarah Jessica Parker was asked a simple question: who was your crush growing up? She didn't hesitate. Robert Redford, she said. Specifically, the way we were. Hubble gardeners. She described having a life-size poster of him. She spoke about his smile, about how light seemed to reflect off his front tooth. It wasn't obsession, it was wonder. The kind that only cinema can create. Then she revealed something even more telling. She had truly dreamed, of playing his daughter in a sequel to The Way We Were, not as fantasy but as something that felt right, obvious, inevitable. When rumors surfaced years ago that someone else might be cast, she admitted she felt physically shaken. Because in her heart, she wasn't imagining a role. She was imagining belonging to a story. And as life often does, art found a way to echo that feeling, years later, in a moment that millions watched without knowing what it truly meant. Fans later noticed something extraordinary. In Sex and the City, during a pivotal scene outside the Plaza Hotel, Carrie Bradshaw confronts Mr. Big, mirroring the final moment of The Way We Were. Carrie's line, "Your girl is lovely, Hubbles." The same words spoken by Barbara Streisand's character decades earlier. When asked if this was intentional, if it was inspired by her lifelong love for Redford, Sarah Jessica Parker paused and said no. But here's the truth. Even when we deny it, the stories that shape us leak through. They live in dialogue, in choices, in emotions. This wasn't imitation. It was influence. A quiet tribute to the man who unknowingly defined how she understood love, loss, and goodbye. There are secrets that don't shock because they're scandalous, but because they're honest, and this was one of them. Robert Redford remains a living legend, his influence alive in every independent film that dares to be different, and in every actor who learned that strength can be gentle. Sarah Jessica Parker never needed to work with him to honor him. She carried him with her, through roles, through lines, through moments that felt personal even when shared with the world. Some legends shape careers. Others shape hearts. And sometimes, the most powerful truths are the ones we wait decades to say out loud. And here we are. Follow the channel for more exclusive insights into Hollywood's icons. Sources and references are available in the description. Stay curious, stay connected. And we'll see you in the next story.